The Security Weekly News is live on Tuesdays and Fridays at 12 o'clock Eastern Time most every week. I try to scan and produce a quick look at some major stories to help you keep up with what's going on in and around the industry in a short format. Myself, Jason Wood, and other guest commentators provide greater insight every week. I'm Doug White, and I hope that you will look for the Security Weekly News in all of your favorite podcast catchers and subscribe for the latest content.
Welcome back to Application Security Weekly. We just talked with Carl Trebas from Imperva about business logic and the complexity of handling the amount of states an API can get into and the amount of data a missing authorization can expose. I'm your host, Mike Shima. I'm here with John Kinsella, and it's just about time for the news. But first, one announcement. Join us at SC Media's Investing in IAM eSummit, September 19th through 20th. That's this week. This two-day virtual event will provide insights from industry experts with a deep dive into identity and access management. Register now for this free event where you will gain cybersecurity knowledge and receive 6.5 CPE credits just for attending. Register today at securityweekly.com/IAM. I am interested this week, Mr. Kinsella, in how much more conversations you want to get into about OWASP top 10 lists. Because we had a good conversation with Carl last segment, and as I did mention in that segment, the OWASP top 10 API is out there. But are you excited about it?
This is my excited face.
Be excited for me? Okay.
No.
Let's move on and talk about some.
I mean, I think we can go back and play like the Quiz John game again and like ask like, was there a new one out? Yeah. I would have had like no idea, like even like 4 or 5 months from now. And I think like I asked him that question sincerely, Carl, in our last segment of like, okay, what, and the point is trying to get to without, making it sound pretty is like, why do we need another one of these things? And I think he had an interesting take on it, which I'll let our listeners go back and listen to. But at the same time, I don't know if we need, I think we need the tools, not so much the list.
Yes.
How about that?
I definitely like that. And go back and listen to episode 242. That was our Quiz John. He was a good sport about all the many curveballs I was able to throw at him. So speaking of top 10 lists, though, cross-site scripting has been on the web, the original, the OG top 10 list for at least 20 years, 30 years is it now? And the Azure HDInsights is riddled with XSS Vulns, as the Orca security title goes. And riddled in this case is 8, so we can call that a riddling. But in this case, what surprised me, I was trying to go through and figure out where did these come from? Because this HDInsights is, Azure's offering of kind of a cloud-oriented overlay of a bunch of just analytics, a bunch of actually Apache projects. I was curious, were these exposed because these were the Apache projects? But no, it does look like it's in the, what do they call their Ambari, or which is part of Apache, but it looks like the fixes were done in Microsoft overlay in the Azure side. And for me, it's kicking in that sort of frustration or, how do we still have a framework, a UI that's allowing not just one, can be a mistake, but multiple. And so that was just sort of why did we have this in the first place? Which I don't think anybody can really answer. So I will just instead point out that these were pretty dead simple, interesting payloads using the image source error handler technique, which is always a fun technique. And also, I will highlight as one neat thing about it is that with the image source, you can do an image /src, and that slash character can be the separator between those HTML attributes, between the tag name and its attribute. So you don't always need a space. So there's your fun cross-site scripting trivia for the day, but I don't know that I can go much more into that without my head exploding, John.
Well, I was looking to doing a quick little search to see if I could find when cross-site scripting came, to see if you were right with your 20 or 30 years. And according to, we have to bring this back full circle, according to Wikipedia, the security engineers at Microsoft introduced the term cross-site scripting in January 2000. But yeah, what was interesting about me to this was I did go clicking through on these, and it seems like, okay, yeah, it's a bunch of, not all, but mostly Apache stuff. I'm not seeing any fixes go back upstream. So, And I think the more interesting thing, it's cross-site scripting. Okay, fine. Microsoft Code found originally. Okay, great. As the folks here at Orca are saying, and they found these using Burp Suite. So there's two parts to this to me. One is if they found this, and this isn't a new service, it's been around for a bit. So, okay, who else has found this? But then the second aspect is, it's, as we've talked about before, from like a pen test point of view, or, put on a different colored hat, but that same idea, like if you are able to find 8 of these things as quickly, it's a sign that there's probably other issues, unfortunately. So hopefully I'm wrong. It is mostly open source software they're packaging, and it's used by other people, and they're big names and they've been around for a while. So hopefully there's security in there. Or let me rephrase that. The source code does not have a lot of vulnerabilities in it. How about that? But yeah, interesting find. But I don't know. Let's keep going. We're talking about Microsoft, so let's keep going at that a little further. Wiz also had. It seems like Wiz and Orca are like just constantly who can get a better blog post out. But you found an article that they had about some data which they were trying to put out in with good intent, Mike, but it looked like it didn't quite completely go that way.
Yeah, and this is just from this morning, and it is a data leak that the Microsoft's AI research team was sharing some open source training data, and as the prophecy foretold, this training data included some sensitive data, including, as what Wiz says, a disk backup of 2 employees' workstations, and in that backup was secrets, private keys, passwords, and even some Microsoft Teams messages. So these are just, Microsoft has not been having a good month with secrets, it would seem. And I guess this is more of just, as I was joking about, as the prophecy foretold, this is one of those things about, that was predicted, that was commented on the top 10 list, yes, but everybody's saying, be careful about what data is being trained on. And if you share that, don't share customer data, especially like in multi-tenant areas. And so what were the controls that were looking through 38 terabytes of data to ensure this is safe? And obviously, I think this is where there's a process that fell down or wasn't even in place. So all I have at this point, unfortunately, is just conjecture. But I'd really love to know how, what are the processes for vetting data before it is being shared? And do those processes rely on AI to say, yep, this looks good, versus something else? It's a secret scanner that ran into some bad regexes, just didn't see that these were, backups, no less.
It's funny. You went to the same place I was thinking about with this, which is, what do existing tools work for this type of thing, or do we need more? I'm more familiar with Amazon than I am with Azure, right? But they're using the same thing as pre-shared keys in S3, and pre-signed keys for S3. But okay, is this other thing out there, the what STS, SLS, S? Anyways, as I go looking for it in the article, I don't know if that's something. I presume some of the tools have ways of searching for and identifying those things, but the underlying thought for me was, as we get more and more complex, your tools have to be able to look for more and more of these things. And obviously, after the stories from last week before, it seems like this org might not be running their tools as frequently as they could be, because some of these leaks are coming out. But still, it's not as bad as it sounds like initially. So I'll score it as an oops.
Ooh, score the Kinsella scoring scale. We're going to have to see the T-shirt of what that is eventually. In terms of other oops, I wanted to pull in another article that tied into our conversation with Carl about business logic, in this case, race conditions. So the researchers at Checkmarks shared some another nuance, another new way of exploiting race conditions, what they call repojacking in GitHub. And this does build on some previous, what's the word I'm looking for as my brain shuts down its race condition, research through 2022 and 2023 about just different ways to say a user or an organization might retire their username. And once that username is, because there's an M&A, they want to rename it, they want to do something with that. So the old name goes away. That old name is now available ostensibly to be picked up by someone else. And if that becomes repojacking if an attacker can get it and then replicate and not, sit on a new repo name that has almost the exact source code as the last one, but perhaps maybe a backdoor or something else fun in there, probably a crypto miner in this day and age. Now, GitHub has built in some protections against this by calling these accounts as retired, meaning that old name can't be picked up by anyone else. But what's been fun to watch is how different researchers, including checkmarks, have found some ways around that. So one of the ways was just looking at just rename an account from the attacker owned to the victim, transferring a repo. So, that's another way of just being able to obtain that repo name. And then recently there was also one to restore a deleted repo and restore that deleted repo into the new repojacked name, or targeting the victim. And the reason I wanted to highlight those bypass techniques around this, how GitHub enforces their retirement, is here's an API or an end state that is being approached in at least 3 different ways, or a couple different ways that have some authorization flaws in them. So some missing authorization checks or some missing logic checks to validate that this shouldn't have happened this way because it should have stayed retired. So I thought that was just kind of a fun way to expand a little bit on the discussion we had with Carl.
It's funny. For historically, I don't think of myself as a big fan of threat modeling, but I seem to be talking about a lot the last few months. This to me was a really good example actually of how to make sure that if you're going to threat model, well, you should be threat modeling, but as you do that you really think through the situation, right? Because this initially, I can imagine, started as someone saying, "Oh, we just need to, if someone changes their username, someone else can come along, register it. Okay, that's like 5 lines of code done. Let's move on to the next project." And then if you start thinking about, okay, well, how would you get access to that and actually start drawing and mapping that out, it suddenly becomes a fairly complex thing, and right, that's no longer a very quick fix. So I think that was interesting about it, and we'll sort of see how this goes. It's humans are creative things, and we're able to come up with different ways of doing stuff. And I'm going to run with that and find another article if I can remember what my own lead-in was. Man, where'd it go? Okay, tag, you're it. I had a lead-in, but I can't find it.
Okay. Well, you did set up a good lead in talking about threat modeling for 2 audits that the CNCF had just published. One for Kyverno, another one for Dragonfly. I want to touch on the Dragonfly one first because that is from Trail of Bits. And in general, I always like, we've mentioned Trail of Bits blog posts before, but I always like looking at security audits just to see what are they finding. And typically, these reports don't really talk about the special techniques or the secret sauce of their approach to how they did the testing, but it does include a list of goals. And these goals are what I wanted to highlight in the sense of the project goals. And these are seeds of threat models in the sense of, is it possible to perform a DOS? Is it possible for an attacker to gain admin privileges? Or, as we were just talking, is it possible for an attacker to hijack a repo that's been retired? And I think that's where, for me, I do enjoy threat modeling, but threat modeling as an exercise on its own can be sort of a so what? What did you do anything with it? Did it inform any design? And this audit, I just wanted to highlight that section of this audit, which I thought was really good. And another part of it was they made some comments about redesign the file handling mechanism for peer-to-peers. So Dragonfly itself is this tool for essentially peer-to-peer file sharing. And they found you could get out of the sandbox, or actually you could get arbitrary file read and write because there wasn't a sandbox. And that part stood out to me as sort of, what? How in this day and age, now, do we not have sandboxing of where these operations should be confined to? And I'll say this day and age, Dragonfly does date back to around 2017 as an open source project, but 6 years still seems long enough to be able to introduce something. So it is nice to see the OpenSSF CNCF in this case, investing in this type of security audit. Now, what will be great too is to see the follow-up investments to be able to apply some sandboxing and do some follow-up work to do the hardening on here that the researchers are pointing out.
It's funny, I was just thinking in your last comment there. These large open source orgs, well, it's mainly Linux Foundation right now, are having to spend a decent chunk of cash on open source projects to really sort of show the overall community that, yeah, they are secure. And I don't know, it's like we've seen OpenSSF is they are hiring security people. Maybe that's their sort of longer term plan, is instead of outsourcing those audits, you do them internally to try and minimize the cost, because these things, guys, are really expensive to do. The reason we talk about Trail of Bits a lot is because they're very good, and as we all know in security, very good people are not cheap. I think that's interesting. It's funny. The other takeaway for me, sorry again, completely non-security, is it gives you a sense of how peer-to-peer software frameworks have become so common. Like I've never even heard of this before, even though it's doing stuff with containers. I still haven't heard of it before. So okay, cool. It was a neat write-up. I think you covered most of it, so I'm gonna shut up and go on to something else. CISA. Let's hit that one real quick. At first, so they've come out with a roadmap for open source security. At first, my thoughts on this one, Mike, was, okay, well, it's another open source doc. Great. What I thought was interesting about this was, beside the fact that they broke it down to sort of 4 clear goals, the 4th goal was really interesting to me, which was, so to go through them really quickly, establish CISA. What do you say? I'll stop doing that. Establish CISA's role in security of open source, drive visibility into OSS usage and risks. Number 3, reduce risks to the federal government. And the 4th one, which caught my eye, harden the OSS ecosystem. So that's of interest to me, because this is now a government for an individual country. We still have those, saying that they're going to improve OSS as a whole, which is a worldwide phenomenon. So I thought how you spend that money on it, how you educate, I thought that was sort of an interesting takeaway from this for me.
It was. And for me, the goals number 2 and 4 aren't specific to the government. The drive visibility, harden the ecosystem. Obviously, the understand how, reduce risk to the U.S. federal government, partner with communities. Not every org is going to do that, but I think every org does need visibility. Carl mentioned that as part of his AppSec in 3 words. The hardening of the OSS ecosystem, that does, my ears perk up at that. And okay, SBOMs would be just great to know what is in the software we create. Ties a little bit back maybe to that conversation, the first article with the cross-site scripting in Microsoft and the Apache open source software it's using. There's at least a relationship of the security of open source software, how either organizations are using it, whether and where the vulnerabilities come from. But for me, objectives 4.2 and 4.3. So 4.2 is security education. 4.3 is guidance on best practices. I guess for me, I really hope that they don't go in a direction of, for education, just repeating, here's everybody should know top 10 lists, or everybody should know this. So I'm really curious what education looks like. And it's a topic we've revisited before, either what do university courses look like on this? How do we approach it? And of course, for the best practices, this really goes back to our 32-page +1 hardening guide. Hopefully we actually see secure defaults that have a hardening guide that is a single page, or even a de-hardening guide, meaning if you need to expand your attack surface, make these changes to the default configuration.
I thought also have to give them kudos in the preamble for this doc. It's not a long paper, but in the beginning of it, they sort of openly go, "Look, open source is great. It's I think they're speaking to the government orgs when they're saying, like, U.S. government departments, of like, hey, this is what allows us to create quickly, and it's part of this ecosystem, which is really allowing us to do all the things we do. So I like seeing them talk about open source in that open, in that sort of beneficial, positive manner, right? We have heard still occasionally a few people out there going like, security is a problem because of open source. And it's like, no, that's not the case. So I appreciate them saying that.
Yeah, you speaking of other cliches that get tamped down, and I don't think we've heard this in a while, but you get what you pay for is old tired cliche about open source. We've moved on significant amount of the world today, and cloud service providers rely quite a bit on open source. Let's go. There's a couple other fun things to dive into. John, you got some neat work in WebP and some Wi-Fi.
Yeah. Let's hit the WebP one first. These are both sort of fun articles. The Wi-Fi one is this. The WebP though. So I imagine pretty much any of our listeners saw over the last week. Anything which was browser related got a patch. So Chrome, Safari, I had to reboot all the things. And it's going down to like things which use browsers or use Chromiums, right? So like anything that renders HTML or something like that is going to patch around this one. But what was interesting to me is just it was a little difficult for me to track down when I went around to it to put a write-up in for our show notes of like what actually happened here, what can I link people to? And so what happened is WebP, for those who don't know, is one of the aspects of it is a format for images for display on the web. So you got GIF, you got JPEG, you got all the different ones. WebP is another one out there. And there was a heap overflow in it. So, okay, it's an open source project. There's a library out there called libwebp. And the guys found it and fixed it. Apparently it was being actively exploited. And I believe it can be turned into a remote code execution. But there was very little details on like what, where, what. And I think they're trying to keep it a little bit under taps. Both Mozilla, as of me checking this morning, Mozilla and Chromium have Jira issues are their flavor of Jira. And they're both private, so you can't actually see the details on them. But I did manage to go out and get the patch to the issue, which we have in our show notes. And I thought that was interesting by itself because, frequently we talk about like any of these overflow type things. Well, you just do bounds checking and keep going, right? This is, with that said, a relatively decent sized patch, right? It's probably like, I don't know, under maybe 200 lines. So it's not huge, but still for like what I just said of like, oh, you just do like a, string in, compare something like that, just check the length and move on. Not so much. It took them a little more work. So I thought that was interesting to try and show what they did in this particular case. Looks like they're, this is C++, I'm pretty sure. Looks like C++. Yeah. So they started using classes and some things in there to try and make it a little more, not just a direct patch, but also clean up the code a little bit while they're at it. So, but I thought that was neat to sort of see what's going on behind the scenes. I'll keep going. The Wi-Fi one, again, this is interesting. So this one's cute. So with Wi-Fi 5, Mike, there's the ability to do something called beamforming, which I think even myself, the only thing I knew about beamforming is it's on the front of every Wi-Fi access point box I've seen for like the last 2 or 3 years, like, ooh, beamforming. And it turns out what beamforming is, or part of what it is, there is an unencrypted protocol. You can already guess where I'm going partially. Unencrypted protocol between each mobile device and the access point. And really what's happening is that is sending back and forth the quality of the signal. So then the access point can figure out, okay, do I need to use a different antenna or how do I respond to that? And that's the general idea. Some folks at a university, I believe they're all the same place. Yeah. HNU.edu. China. Or no, there's some Singaporeans in here also. So some stuff going on in Asia. They realize that this is unencrypted. And for most of us, if you're not watching on the video, you can sort of imagine you got your thumbs on your phone or something like that. As you touch your phone screen to like type in your letters, there's a antenna on the back of that screen because you only have so much space to put these antennas in these things. And it turns out just by where you tap on that screen actually can attenuate the signal. And with every keystroke, every time you tap, it looks like that quality of signal is being reported back to the access point. So what these guys are able to do is with up to 90% accuracy, be able to tell you if you're using a numerical password for your Wi-Fi, what the characters are on that password. So I thought that was sort of, it's an information disclosure thing, I think, in the end of the day. But I thought that was a neat little bit of research to figure that one out.
It is really neat, and it kind of falls into that, that sort of side channel or types of attack that if you can measure the more accurately or more precisely you can measure something, potentially the more interesting information can get out of it. And this is just being able to have Wi-Fi precisely measure responses and changes in signal strength, which is a wonderful, fun application. And so it is nice. I'm glad you pulled that in because it's nice to see creativity still alive and well within the hacker mentality.
At the end of the day, you have to wonder, do we have to encrypt every single thing we do? And I'm sure the security nerds amongst us go say yes, but okay, is that realistic? Or, it's just signal strength, right? You don't really need to encrypt that, do you? And I guess once those words come out of your mouth, someone is going to get creative.
Someone's going to get creative. One of the things too, another thing is, I'm going to riff off that in the sense of, well, just do some testing, just deploy a fuzzer or, the type of thing. Can be another type of security recommendation. We do love fuzzing here, at least I do very much. One of the other CNCF investments and audit reports they released was putting a fuzzer on Kyverno. And for me, what stood out here was the very positive approach of this wasn't just a few week effort to say, let's run a fuzzer, see what it finds, fix those vulns. It was the investment in helping the project integrate that harness so that this can be fuzzing on an ongoing basis. And so part of the audit was, here's what it takes, here's what we can actually do to help you get started. And by the way, we did find a few things, so we're going to demonstrate some of its value. But this is the type of thing that, should we encrypt everything? Sure, you can say yes, but who's going to do the work? I think a lot of, whether it's CNCF, OpenSSF, or any other open source project, they're probably overwhelmed with security recommendation. Oh, you should just do this. You should just do that. You can shrug and say, who's going to help me? Do you have the time? We don't need to know more of how bad things are. We need some help on doing things. And I thought this was just a great concrete example of the doing things investment. So hopefully we see a lot more of that.
Yeah, these guys are, I got to work with Kyverno once or twice. When they first came into CNCF, I worked with them on a little project we were doing to try and see if we could improve the outreach to open source projects. A stand-up group of folks, but they actually care about the security stuff at the base, right? So I'm not surprised to see them doing something like this. The code is pretty clean, so I'm confident that they went through it pretty quickly or without too many issues. But then with that said, what we were trying to do in that project, and what my interest would be here is, how do you then take something like this and expand it out to all the other open source projects? Well, let's say CNCF for now and focus ourselves a little bit, but how can we or CISA or whoever take a really great tool like this, an example of it, and get it out into other people's hands?
Absolutely. And that could be investments both in the OSS Fuzz project to make it easy, make it develop more usability, easier to integrate, as well as within each of the individual projects to actually incorporate it. So it's one of those things, let's see more of this development and the engineering side of AppSec rather than yet another list of what should be there. And of course, it's no surprise I've been teasing, making a little bit of fun of all these OWASP top 10 lists. But I did want to make sure that for all of you members out there, the OWASP 2023 Global Board of Elections are coming up well. And I linked to the page. It has a link to the people that are running. I think all of their statements have been updated. So it'd be interesting to see, and I think interesting for us to watch what the future of OWASP does become. Will it focus on the community aspect, meaning that their revenue comes from the different conferences? You can look at their, their past meetings, the meetings, minutes, and reports from the board executive are public. And it's really interesting to see. So will we see more of just that community lean in, education, hopefully some good education, or will we see some more investment into projects, that sort of builder side of things, let's call it, rather than yet more breaking or cheat sheets or just here's how things could go wrong type of investments?
Yeah. It's interesting, right? It's one thing to, and I'm not commenting on anyone who's running or has run anything else, but it's one thing to get so active with these open source projects that you end up in leadership. But then the question is, what do you do with it? And I think that's, it's especially for something like this, is when we've been looking for the last year or so, what direction does OWASP want to go? So that's, what, just to think about for a moment, like, how does someone write their, all these candidates have like their candidate pages. It's like, okay, what do you put on there? What is it that you want to accomplish if you become the part of that leadership work? So I think that's interesting. And then I just want to make it clear for folks out there listening, mark your calendars. Voting opens on the 15th of October and it closes on the 30th. So don't forget to vote.
Don't forget to vote, and make sure to renew your membership if you're also so that you can do so. And last week, we talked with Simon Bennett about Project Zap, and it was also interesting to the conversation with him. Zap has moved over to the Secure Software Project, but he's still curating the known vulnerable applications project on OWASP. So there's still there are still areas that are niches that those two different projects, as well as one project leader, are leaning on or directing. I think here, John, I'm running out of exciting things to say because hopefully everything here has been exciting for our listeners. I threw in one quick comment about an end of servicing plan for third-party printer drivers in Windows. Don't want to make this overly focused on Microsoft, other than really to point out that, wow, it takes a couple years to deprecate something. So we've seen this within the browsers with trying to just get rid of TSL 1.0, trying to get rid of MD5 checksums and move to SHA. Here it's nice to see this approach. We just got to wait till 2027, I think, before this is finally we've reduced successfully in an attack.
Yeah, I'm not looking at this with unfortunately my usual viewpoint. It's interesting that to secure, I'll say, this operating system, that you have to deprecate the ability for third parties to have drivers. Does that mean now if someone's going to come up with a new printer, how you have to work with Microsoft to get it in there? And it seems like we'd been for a while as a community been going towards open source stuff. Like, the Mac OS is using IPP, and I see IPP mentioned here. I think it's the same IPP. So I'm not saying good or bad. It's just, we've made plenty of jokes over the years of window drivers as a way into a system. So, printer drivers. So I get it, but I guess sort of unfortunate that, again, nothing against them, but that's how we have to secure things. It's just by stopping the allowment of third parties.
And I do appreciate, in securing things, that we can, do that rewrite / refactor into a secure, memory safe language. That's, Windows, Linux, the browsers are all embracing Rust to one degree or another. Linux in particular was also picking on Rust for its network drivers. So drivers, they often, because of the architecture, often get to touch that kernel memory, kernel areas. So one little flaw becomes a impactful flaw. But another approach, of course, is to delete code, and removing code removes attack surface. So I also like it from that perspective.
It's sort of interesting to think about comparing and contrasting this approach with, how you do API security, to think back to that, right? You can't just remove the APIs from, so, okay, how do you harden them? Do you put a WAF in front? What do you do? And I don't know, interesting to sort of think between the two.
Well, think between the two is what you and I always do every week, Mr. Kinsella. And this was episode 255, as I pointed out in the interview segment intro. So we're going to roll over into, we've exhausted 8 bits, but hopefully we haven't exhausted you, John. So I say thanks for joining us every week.
I will still be here, whether it's 256 or 1 again.
That's awesome. Yes, let's find out how the integer overflow goes, or does it go, next week. Thank you, John. Thank you, everyone else, for joining us. Please do subscribe, hit that like button. Check out the show notes. We have a bunch of extra comments and ideas in there that we don't always get to touch on during the show. And speaking of 8 bits and some awesome chip tunes, check out Metropolis by Street Cleaner. We'll see you next time on Application Security Weekly.